Thank you. I don't know where you found all that stuff. Thank you very much. I'd never even heard about half of that. It's pretty funny. And I'd totally forgotten that I worked at CNN or MSNBC until I went into the men's room tonight and there were CNN urinal pucks. Literally. I don't know who did that, but God bless you. I worked at CNN for many years and MS. MS had not become the Leon Trotsky channel at that point. It was sort of attempting to be reasonable. But CNN was always unbearable, if I can say. I think I spent 7 years there. And it was just one unending fight with the management team over there after another. I mean, it just never kind of ended. And your average day would begin, you get to work, and producers would come in and say, we have a directive from headquarters. We're no longer allowed to use the word foreign on the air. And I said, why? He's like, banning a word? Well, because foreign suggests different. And we don't prefer that, and frankly, it's alienating to some of our viewers, and so we can't use that. And I said, well, there are times when things just are foreign. Cannibalism, for example, not an American thing. It's foreign. No, that's pejorative. We're not going to use that. In all cases where you would use foreign, you are required, you are hereby commanded to use the term international. So I had a co-host, I was hosting Crossfire at the time, who was on the left, but in his heart burned the fires of freedom, at least on linguistic matters. And so we set it up where live, because in the end, like, they can tell you whatever they want, but if it's live and there's no 5-second delay, you're sort of in charge. And I started going like this right in the middle of the show, and he said, "What, are you okay?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I have an international object in my eye." They were so mad. I'd totally forgotten that until I saw the urinal puck tonight. Weirdly, it evoked that memory. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. I never go anywhere. I was saying at dinner, I never leave my house. I live in D.C., which voted 91%. I moved from that farmhouse, sadly. Never should have. But just the nature of the gig. I don't go anywhere, basically. I don't give a lot of speeches. But earlier this year, Kathy's piece came out. It was excerpted in a bunch of different places on the Edina schools. And it was just, and we did a whole segment on it, and it was exactly what I love most, which is fact-based reporting that shows in an irrefutable way what you knew was happening. I mean, you knew that. There wasn't a single thing in there that shocked me, though the cumulative effect was shocking. But it was so gratifying to see it laid out in a way that couldn't be denied. And it had a great effect, because it always does when you do things like that. So God bless you for doing that, and a lot of things like that. And fighting corporate wind power, which really is yet another way to abuse rural communities, in my opinion. And of course, the scourge of bicycles. I'm glad you're on that too. So I really wanted to come here for all those reasons. And also because I love this state. It's a state that all Carlsons feel at home at. I'm serious. In fact, the first speech I ever gave was to the Republican Women's Club of New York City on the east side of Manhattan 25 years ago. I'm sure not one of them is still a Republican. No, serious. I mean, that really has been the realignment. People like that, are enthusiastic Hillary voters, but at the time they were still avid Republicans, or thought they were. And so they had asked me, I was like 24, 25, come give a speech, whatever, for the price of dinner. And so I went, and the woman starts to stand up to give my introduction. And right before she leads down and says, I loved your grandmother. I knew your grandmother. And I thought, well, my grandmother lived in Kauai, actually, and was kind of a very bizarre person, a chronic alcoholic, and a recluse. Unlikely anyone would know her. And I said, "You knew my grandmother?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, she's a wonderful person." I thought, well, that wasn't her. Yeah, clearly, it's a different grandmother. So with that, and I should have known something was amiss, she stands up and she said, first words, Tucker Carlson grew up in politics. His father was governor of Minnesota. His mother is a widely beloved talk show host in Minneapolis, Barbara. I think the word she used was sassy. That's always the word they use, isn't it? Sassy. Not quite a compliment, but whatever. So I had to get up and clarify. And of course, there are a bunch of people in the room, being the Women's Republican Club of Manhattan, who, of course, knew Arnie and Barbara Carlson, needless to say. And so I had to get up and concede that I was not that Tucker Carlson. Arnie Jr. Tucker Carlson, who, by the way, has stolen my Gmail account, and if he's here, I want it back. But that I was this imposter from La Jolla, California, and they acted like I had pulled a fast one on them. They were actively hostile to me for the rest of the night. That never happens, by contrast, when I come here. I grew up, as I said, in Southern California, and then Washington, and really the only Scandinavian I knew was my dad, who grew up in a Swedish-speaking family and really dislikes Scandinavians, but whatever, but is one. So as a result of that, I've never really been around them, and I never think of it as an ethnic category, ever, because I only really know one. And then I come, the second I land here, and everybody looks like my children. I'm not exaggerating. Same head shape. I think, actually, it's a pretty small gene pool, the Scandinavian thing. I'm not kidding. I did the receiving line tonight. I met many of you for pictures. Probably half the people looked like my kids. It was bizarre. I'm not imagining this. Trust me, because it's not true. I travel. I've been everywhere. It's just true in Minnesota. Anyway, it's just a really nice culture. I always feel at home here, and part of the reason is that some deep ethnic affinity, I guess. Part of it is I think that cold weather makes nice people. I really believe that. I believe that. As someone who grew up on the Mexican border, I've kind of seen both sides of this, but there's something about suffering through winter, delaying gratification. I'm not joking in any way. Garrison Keillor, whose politics I don't share, but is onto this in some way. There's something about the suffering, the cyclical nature of the seasons. It really is preparation, A, for your own demise. There's sort of no denying death in a cold weather place, right? Which I think, by the way, is good. But more than that, it brings out the latent sweetness in people. People are nicer when they have to shovel snow. Most people look forward to retiring to Florida, and my wife, who, I would love, but wants to, retire to Boca Grande, Florida, whatever. I'm retiring to Maine. I'm not kidding, because I think it's good for you. Anyway, thank you. It's a long way of saying I'm really glad to be here. So I'm a very verbose person, and I see that it's 8:30, so I'm going to try to keep this crisp because I want to open it up to your hostile questions. And give you the top 3 things that I have learned in the last year or year and a half since Trump got elected. So there's a lot that's bad about this moment, obviously, and a lot that is very threatening about it, I think, and very much that is bewildering about it. But one good thing about it, I would say, is that it's caused everybody who's paying attention to really assess what is true and what isn't true, and to take stock of our own beliefs. Most people, this was true for me, sort of accumulate their political beliefs in college, and they don't reassess them, because why would you? You sort of know what you know, and you sign up for this whole fixed price menu of beliefs, and you sort of know they're true, and you don't measure them against reality because you know that they're true already, and you don't have any cause really to reassess. And this moment, I think, has caused a lot of people to ascend up to the mental attic and think, is this stuff still valid? Do I still believe it? Should I still believe it? That's good. It's also been one of those moments because of that where things become clear all of a sudden. The coalitions on both sides have completely broken down, and people who thought they were on the same team turn out to have nothing in common and have aligned with the other team. And I'm sure this is true in many of your families. It's true in my family. I mean, I have relatives who voted Republican literally since Lincoln. I mean, you know what I mean? Whole side of the family, and they were avid Hillary voters all of a sudden. And the opposite is true in parts of this state, for sure. I think up near Duluth, I think there's a lot of, families who never thought they would vote Republican who voted for Trump. So you're seeing things more clearly, what people really believe is coming to the surface. And I think that's great. It's good to know the truth about what people value and what they don't value. So here are the 3 things I've learned. The first is that nobody in authority in Washington, and I hate to tell you this, but it's true, on either side, so I'm including every Democratic-controlled institution, which is basically all of them, and the Republican leadership, by and large, a few exceptions, like one. Nobody has meditated on the basic question that comes out of the election, which is, why did America just vote for Donald Trump? Instead, the attention has been wholly on Trump. Trump did this, Trump said that, here's his latest tweet. And that suits, if I can say, Trump just fine. Talking about Trump is never something Trump objects to. And I'm not attacking him for that. I'm merely noting that it possibly could obscure a deeper question, which is, why would a country vote for Trump? Now, rather than, in other words, this was not expected. Nobody expected it on either side, and yet it happened. So what does it tell us about voters? Well, if you listen to the analysis on television, even from some Republicans, it goes like this. Either voters just, literally had no idea who Trump was. They just didn't know, and they voted for him randomly, right? Or, worse, they did know. This is the Democratic position. I hear it every night. Trump is a terrible person, and so are they. And horrible people kind of find each other, like in the great politicalmatch.com. You know what I mean? And his repulsive qualities are what drew them to him. In other words, there were millions of people out there who saw the Access Hollywood tape and thought, finally, someone who speaks for me. You know what? I want that man to babysit my kids. Are you kidding? I've been waiting for someone to say that. Oh, thank God. Which is insane. Or, my favorite, Putin did it. Putin did it. Which does, in some sense, absolve the rest of us of any responsibility. If it was just a pure Russian operation, Russia being the gravest threat we face. I was not just a history major, I was a Russian studies major. And the Russians are not capable of producing a working escalator right now. So they could hijack our election with $100,000 in Facebook ads aimed at both candidates. Unlikely. But whatever, the Russians did it. So, I mean, that's amusing. All those explanations are kind of amusing. But again, they distract from a conversation we really need to have, which is, what was the calculation of voters? And part of it, of course, was compared to what? The old Henny Youngman line, how's your wife? Compared to what? In this case, that was Hillary Clinton. But it was deeper than that, actually. And the truth is, the people in charge, on both sides, failed demonstrably in their economic policy, in their foreign policy, in their social policy. And voters knew that. And so it shouldn't surprise us that no one responsible for those demonstrable failures committed over a series of decades would be very anxious to come forward and say, you know what, I did this. I made America so desperate they voted for Donald Trump. Nobody wants to admit that, but that's exactly what happened. Instead, you have seen this extended exercise in CYA, which is what it is, where the people in charge blame the population for their failures. But this, by the way, is a consistent theme. The authorities at every level, pick an example. The housing crisis, the Parkland shooting. Name something bad that's happened in the last 10 years, and I will tell you a story about blame shifting, where the people who did it, whose unwise decisions resulted in the disaster/tragedy, blame the victims of the tragedy for the tragedy. So the Parkland shooting, you could get me going. The Parkland shooting happens, and we can trace in forensic detail the cascading series of failures that led to 17 people being killed, culminating in 4 armed deputies standing outside listening to the gunfire and doing nothing. Whose fault is it? It's yours. It's yours. If you gave money to the NRA or have a firearm at home or even sort of believe the Second Amendment is valid, think the Bill of Rights still matters, it's your fault, you're the dangerous one. Really. That's the message from the people who committed those failures that led to that tragedy. That is a useful way to think about the entire election cycle of 2016 and the aftermath of it. okay? All of it is blame shifting. You're being blamed for their failures, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing that I have learned is a related truth, and it is that almost everything is transference. Freud wrote a whole book on this. The thing, and by the way, you can see this in your own life. If you're married over a period of years, you will find yourself annoyed by things that your spouse does. And if you're really honest with yourself, you will find that it's your failings that infuriate you. And you see it in your children, too. If you have more than one child, maybe there's one child who just gets under your skin, that kid's the most like you. No, it's true. 100% of the time. You see your shortcomings in other people, and it enrages you. And so you blame them for the ways that you have fallen short. So a sort of handy test is listen carefully to what the left accuses you of doing, and you know exactly what they're up to. And again, I could give you 100 examples, but my absolute favorite came yesterday from Madeleine Albright. And I don't often say that. No, I mean, it's all late-stage empires are the same. The mediocre ascend. Things kind of fall apart. The edges crumble. Dumb people keep getting richer and more powerful, and nobody notices. Madeleine Albright, a living example of this. But yesterday, she accused the administration of abetting fascism by their appeasement of Vladimir Putin. And I thought, that's it. What is and I don't mean to single, actually I do mean to single out the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, when I say this. And yes, it's personal. But it's true. What does she do for a living? Oh, she sucks up to the fascist dictatorship of China for a living and has gotten rich doing that, has an entire firm. Her whole business is based on kowtowing to the fascist government of China. What is the single greatest source of foreign wealth in Washington? Oh, China. What country has hacked more government and industry databases than any other by a factor of like 10x? China. What country actually exercises censorship over what we can say, over the speakers who can come to university campuses, over the movies that Hollywood can make, over the ads that run on our air on television? Mercedes-Benz apologized yesterday for saying something nice about the Dalai Lama in one of its ads to the government of China. Now, I'm not here to attack China. I'm merely here to say it's a little bit striking that the hysteria over Russia, the single greatest threat we face, is coming from the very people who are abetting the rise of our actual rival on the world stage, which is China. But maybe it shouldn't be surprising, because once again, it's all transference. Everything they accuse you of, they're doing. Every fault they say you have defines them. Every one of them. I thought Freud was discredited. I'm now a Freudian. Because it's so true. For all his creepy theories about cigars, he was right about this. You keep hearing people say on the set of Morning Joe that really what's going on is that Trump is trying to undermine democracy. He doesn't believe in democracy. Really? By the way, I could write a book about the shortcomings of the Trump administration. I'm not here to flag for Trump. I mean, if Trump were a real fascist, the trains would be running on time. Actually, they're crashing. So, okay, we could use a little more Mussolini, I would say, in the administration of this administration. But, just being honest, I live there. But to listen to all the smart people in D.C., the real threat is the creeping authoritarianism of the Trump administration. No, it's actually the disorganization and incompetence, but whatever. But it does sort of raise the question, if you really did want to undermine democracy and install a dictatorship, what are the steps you would take? What would you do? Like, let's say you and I are having a couple drinks. Let's undermine democracy, shall we? Let's create an authoritarian dictatorship. Want to? Yes, let's do it. Got a pen? Yeah, take this down. What's the first thing you would do? Well, of course. Huh? Well, you might elect Hillary. No, but you wouldn't. That's too obvious. It's too obvious. You elect Hillary, and all of a sudden people's spidey senses start tingling. Woo, she's a threat. No. No, you know what you would do? Is you would make dissent impossible. You would circumscribe the terms of every debate. You would tell people, you can't say that. That's offensive. Are you persist in saying that? I'm calling the HR department, which is going to fire you. If you really wanted to make this an authoritarian country, you wouldn't send the National Guard in people's neighborhoods. You would make HR more powerful, actually. And that's exactly what we've done. You would tell people that they're not allowed to express certain sentiments online. You would boot them off Twitter. You would have Facebook crack down on them. You would have Google change its search results to eliminate controversial results, which they've done. You would go after the First Amendment, people's freedom to say what they think, okay? And they've done that consistently over a period of years with increasing levels of ferocity. What's the second thing you do? Well, you obviously try to strip them of their right to defend themselves. The Second Amendment, to make them wholly dependent upon you for their protection. Of course you would. Duh. An armed society is an independent society. I'm not being a crazy person. I'm not Alex Jones here. I'm actually repeating the sentiments that led to the not that I mean it's Alex Jones increasingly, but whatever. Oh yeah. I'm sure it's going to wind up on YouTube and I'm going to have to explain it to my boss, but whatever. I'm just half kidding. No, but the point is, look, I don't like the idea anymore. I'm totally sick of it. That like you're not allowed to say certain things or have certain thoughts, or that's not allowed. That puts you in the same company as X. I'm totally over that. I believe you should assess somebody's ideas on their own terms. Don't tell me who that sounds like, who said it before, who retweeted me. Tell me what you think of what I just said. Does it stand or fall on its own merits? Is it true? I've supervised hundreds of reporters over my life. And rule one always, for any stories, is it true? Not, are you taking a lot of crap for it? Does someone not like it? Is it true? Truth is a defense. And if you were trying to create a totalitarian society, you would remove it as a grounds for defense. You would say, it doesn't matter whether it's true, it's not allowed. Okay? And the third thing you would do if you were against democracy is undermine democracy. You would literally undermine democracy. Why? Because democracy is the enemy of authoritarianism, because it obviously is a diffusion of power. It's taking power from the few and giving it to the many. And any kind of unauthorized election result, like if you were to take like a real estate developer from Queens and give him the Republican nomination, the first thing you would do is try and use organizations to take it away. So you would say on TV, maybe on Morning Joe actually, you would say, we're going to take it from the convention. And let's say democracy gave him the White House anyway. You would say, I'm going to take it from him in the Electoral College, which they did. And if that didn't work, what would you do? You would use a large unelected bureaucracy to hamstring that administration. And by the way, they've done that. And yet these are the same people who are telling us that we're against democracy. No, you're against democracy. Democracy gave us Brexit and Donald Trump, and that's why you hate it. And the third and final thing I've learned, again, before I turn it over to you, is that the stakes are higher than I thought, actually. So the key mistake that conservatives make, and I'm using conservative in the broadest sense, anybody who's uncomfortable with what our biggest institutions right now, academia, finance, tech, the unelected bureaucracy, if you're uncomfortable with what they're doing, their crackdown on free expression, then you're in the conservative category I'm talking about. The mistake that people in that category, our category, make is in assuming that the other side has the same assumptions. And the core assumption of every conservative or classical liberal or non-liberal, whatever you want to call this, the people that I'm talking about, I'm sure most people here, is a live and let live assumption. You're into your thing, you believe strongly in it, I'm into my thing, I believe strongly in it. We may disagree, but in the end, I'm not going to come over to your house and try to get you into my thing. Do you know what I mean? When I was a kid, we grew up in Southern California in this weird kind of affluent, out-of-it town called La Jolla, and we were Episcopalians, because my mother was. Somewhere along the line, Lutheranism had been abandoned. We were Episcopalians. My mother's sister had married a Baptist, which is another brand of Christianity. I'd never met one. And they lived in Texas. we were very secular, being Episcopalians. They were very religious. We were English and Scandinavian, so everyone drank all the time, constantly. They didn't drink at all. They were very nice people, but they lived in a completely different way from the way we lived, and we secretly made fun of them. Holy roller, Jesus freaks, whatever, weird, whatever. 40 years later, they're all like happy and prosperous and have white teeth, and they're all still married, and like, I love them, and I now agree with them, but whatever. But we coexisted in the same family for all these decades without ever trying on either side, from either direction, to force the other family to change. Because the unspoken assumption was, you do your thing, we'll do ours. That's probably the unspoken assumption of everybody in this room. It's not the assumption of the left. This was a huge mistake, conservatives, especially social conservatives, and I should say, I don't even know where this room is on the question. I am a social conservative. I didn't grow up as one, I am now. That's for sure. And everything that means, and it's sincere too. I think my wife and I are the only pro-life Episcopalians in the world. But anyway, but social conservatives really made this mistake, because what they didn't understand was the other side had very different aims from the ones that they were promised. So the original deal was, look, we just want you to acknowledge that, like, we're allowed to do what we want to do. And in the end, that's not a hard case to make to conservatives. They're like, okay, yeah. I mean, there aren't many, I don't think I've ever met any conservatives like, I want to go into someone's house and make them behave differently. I've met a lot of liberals who feel that way. So the truth actually is that this is another case of transference, they don't believe in diversity at all. What they want is sameness. It drives them insane to think somewhere in some remote county in the red clay of Alabama, somebody has an attitude that's not authorized by them. It drives them insane. They feel threatened by it. It keeps them up at night. They write snippy little essays in the New Yorker about it, like they can't get over it. Whereas in Alabama, I don't think they're saying, somewhere in downtown Minneapolis, someone's got a different view. I'm enraged. It never occurs to them. The instinct to compel people to live a certain way resides only on one side. And so the truth is, here's why this is meaningful. Here's why it's relevant. When they win, they'll vanquish you. That's the truth. But let me just be honest. I'm not here to whip anybody into a frenzy. I'm a very calm person by temperament. I mean it. No, I am. I mean, I get along with everyone on my show. I don't like acrimony, actually. In 27 years of being married, I think I used to drink a lot. I don't anymore, but I raised my voice at my wife maybe twice. She's never once raised her voice at me. She's from the Midwest, very sweet. I don't like that crap. So I'm not trying to whip people. I'm not Milo. I'm not here to make you mad. No, I'm not against Milo, but I'm not. I'm not being a demagogue. I'm being totally honest. This is what I've learned in the last year and a half. They want to change your culture. They want to, I'm serious, intellectually occupy your lands, torch your hut, slay your livestock. I'm serious. They want to do to you what the Vikings did to the French coast. I mean it. They believe they have a moral mission, an imperative to do this, to change the way you live, and not just the way you live, but what you think. They seek to control not simply what you say and do, but what you think, what you believe. Imagine even having that desire. I don't even want to control what my kids believe. And I don't try, actually, because I'm not that way. But they're very, very different. So the consequences, here's the point I'm making. The consequences of losing, it's not what you think. It's not like, oh, they're in charge, I'll just go back to my family and kind of do my thing. No, they're going to come all the way to Edina and take over your schools. I mean it. Yeah, I'm joking. They are already, exactly. That's the point. That's exactly the point. And in every other little town, they want total control over your attitudes. They demand that. So it's not a matter of two cultures coexisting. That's not the story of history, actually. No, one culture dominates and subsumes the losing culture into itself. And actually, that's kind of what historians are finding now that the human genome has been decoded. That when, one invading group would come in, it would kind of, like, the other group would kind of disappear. I'm not talking about physical invasions, I'm talking about an ideological invasion, because that's really what they're planning. So I guess I was talking to my wife about it, who's become really radical. Went from being kind of sweet, liberal girl to being like the only Trump voter in her zip code. But the only reason she became radical is because she sensed that this stuff was a threat to her family. She could care less. She's totally uninterested in ideology. Like, some abstract idea means nothing to her. She's a mother of 4. It's like, how does it affect my kids? And she could smell, like a dog could smell, that these people want to change her kids. And they mean it. And she understood that before I did. And she started baring her teeth about it. And I was like, what's getting you so wound up? And she said, I feel really threatened. I can't quite articulate it. I feel really threatened. And she's convinced me that we have, in the last year and a half of debating the other side as civilly as I can manage, has convinced me that she's absolutely right. And the only response, and I just want to be totally clear, I hate violence and I'm not advocating it now, nor would I ever. But I am advocating fighting back, baring your teeth back, putting up with no crap. I talked to Jordan Peterson, this is the last thing I'll say, but I had a super interesting conversation with Jordan Peterson, who's a Canadian psychologist. I can't believe I'm having a conversation with a Canadian psychologist. 2 categories I never thought I'd take advice from, but whatever. He's actually like a genius, and he's got the best-selling book ever written by a Canadian right now, and he's like the star of YouTube, and he's a very deep character, and he's not exactly a right-winger, he's just a truth teller, which puts you into the right-winger category these days. We were talking, and I said, so, he said, if you find in your school that they're lecturing your children about imaginary things like white privilege or toxic masculinity, and I'm thinking, I put 4 kids through 12 years of Episcopal school, like, that's the whole curriculum. He said, if you find that, I was like, yeah, I've found that. He goes, pull them out immediately. And I said, like, for a day? He goes, no, for good. I said, but in rich guy world I live in, there are no options. Do you know what I mean? Like, none. That's it. That's what, you got radical and, like, anarchist. And that's kind of the spectrum. I said, but so what do you do? He goes, don't educate them. In other words, you should recognize this for what it is, which is a threat to your family, to the souls of your children, to everything that you think is important or sacred or holy. This is an existential threat to all of those things. It's not a small thing. It's not an annoyance. It's not something to bat away with a sigh like, oh, they're so crazy. It is the beginning of the end for everything you care about. Anyway, when he said that, it was one of those moments where I realized, you know what? I just heard the truth, and I resolved, I'm going to fight like a rabid raccoon with hemorrhoids, like an angry, grouchy raccoon. You know what I mean? Every step of the way. No crap. I'm going to call every single person in my life who tries to impose that stuff on my family or in my world to account. Whoa, stop. Wait, what? Explain yourself. What does that mean? Tell me why we should do that. How does that help my son? Oh, you can't tell me? Oh, I'm going to war with you. I'm going to write a letter to every member of the board. Oh, you know what? I'll probably just do a segment on you on my show. How we should defund your stupid school. How's that sound? In other words, why wouldn't I be as aggressive in defense of my family as the left is aggressive in its efforts to change the world my family lives in? What the hell is this? Ah! Anyway, I better stop now before I say something insane. Do we have time for one question or are we done? Thank you for having me.
Tucker, that was marvelous. We got time for a couple of questions.
Oh, great.
Yeah. I think we do have time for a couple of questions. I know we got a couple of folks. I think Peter and Perry have handheld microphones. We don't have a lot of time, but I think it'd be fun to take a couple, if I can spot. Well, here's one right here. Mr. Fry.
I shall.
Hi, Mr. Carlson. Oh, over here. To the right. To your right.
Okay, I'm nearsighted, but I'm just going to believe you.
Hi, my name is Kelly Jensen.
Okay.
I'm from the University of Minnesota Duluth College Republicans. We're honored to be here. Thank you so much for
thank you.
coming. I actually do have a question, but we do have a Tucker Carlson Jr. in our club who actually someone came up and asked if he was your son. So we did want to point that out. But
He should be like my son and deny it. Just kidding.
But I did want to ask, what do you think about the feud between Sean Hannity and Jimmy Kimmel?
I mean, I called Sean about it last night because I was so amused. You know, I mean, I think a lot of things. I think in general, I think a lot of things. I'm glad I'm not in it. I don't think I'd be particularly good at that. Sean is like a beast. He's just a savage, and that's his métier. So I love it. I mean, I loved it. I called it. I was like, I can't believe we're doing this. You make my day. So that's how I feel about it. But we each have different roles. Like, I don't want to fight with Jimmy Kimmel. You know what I mean? But Sean does, and I think the bottom line is you got to fight back. I mean, I will say this. I've seen a lot of people hurt by HR departments. I can't overstate the degree to which they are empowered to hurt people without due process and destroy their lives. I have a happy marriage, thank God, so I haven't been a target of any of this. But like, if I had a weird personal life, and a lot of like pretty good people do actually, I'd be gone. And here's who doesn't get killed in purges like this: the people who fight back. Can I say one thing? This is my favorite story ever. I can't control myself. So there's this guy, Simon Sebag Montefiore, who's a Russian scholar in Great Britain, okay? And when the Soviet archives opened up, he went over to Moscow and somehow got a hold of Stalin's personal archives. As I said, I was a Russian studies major, so I was interested in this. He found, there was a huge debate over whether Stalin was just a bureaucrat or whether he was actually like a devoted and sincere communist. Well, he was the latter, it turned out. It also turned out that he signed every death warrant. 1937, he killed the entire officer corps, almost, of the Red Army. And he signed every freaking order. That year, there was only, I think there were like 3 colonels, full-bird colonels, who survived that year, the purges. And one of them survived in the following way. Cheka showed up, KGB showed up at his apartment, 3 in the morning, knock on the door, get in the car, we're taking you to Lubyanka, like everyone knows you're going to get executed. This one guy, and everyone went along with it. This one guy's like, what? No. And they're like, well, we have an arrest warrant signed from Comrade Stalin. And he goes, no, I'm not going. And they're like, but you have to. And he's like, nope, not doing it. And by the way, I don't think that's a real signature. And they're like, well, yeah. And he's like, call the Kremlin and check. And they're like, no, get in the car. And he's like, that's not a real signature. And if you execute me, Stalin's going to execute you. And I'm not going. They called and woke Stalin up. This was in the archives. And Stalin's like, no, it must be a mistake. Stalin, the most prolific murderer in human history, was so embarrassed when confronted directly with this death warrant that he denied it, and this colonel lived until 1985. He was the only one. What does that tell us about human nature? It tells you that the one guy is like, I'm not going. You can hand me the shovel, I'm not digging my grave. In fact, I'm giving you the finger. Dig it for me, pal. You're going to have to. I'm not going along with this. That's the lesson. Sorry.
Well, we got time for, I think, maybe one more question. Mike Fry, right down in front here, had a question. Mike? Great question. The question is, given this autocratic power of the left, as has been described, why is it that we've got a Republican president, Senate, House, however many governorships, most of the state legislative chambers, and so on?
Well, I made a critical mistake in my remarks, and it was born out of laziness and habit, and it was this. I described the forces arrayed against voters as the left, when I should have described them as what they really are, which is the people in charge, the ruling class, the people benefiting from the status quo, okay? That's the truth. The reason Trump got elected is really simple. It's a middle-class country. It has to be. Democracies don't function except in middle-class countries. You can't have robust market economies other than a middle-class country, right? Our middle class died. This is no longer a majority middle-class country as of 2015. Kind of no one noticed it. But that happened. And in fact, for the non-college educated middle class, life expectancy has declined 2 years in a row. This never happened in American history, and nobody cares. By the way, if the life expectancy of Syrian immigrants were declining, there'd be a page one editorial in the New York Times saying, this is not who we are. Not that I'm against Syrian immigrants or whatever. I'm merely saying if your own middle class dies and your own leaders don't even notice, then you have a problem with your leadership, which is they don't care about you. And that doesn't work. Because, by the way, would you be a good parent if you didn't care about your children? Would you be an effective officer if you didn't care about the safety of your men? No, they would die. Would you be a good CEO? I mean, just leadership requires empathy. It's a prerequisite. And our leaders don't have it because they're getting rich and more powerful. The crash comes in 2008. 1/3 of all household wealth is eliminated in a year. Some of it came back, but when the smoke clears, most people are poor, the top 1% richer than ever. I'm not attacking anybody. I'm certainly pro-capitalism. I'm one of its great beneficiaries. And I've been, I would say, a voice for markets my whole life, and I'll continue to be. But it doesn't change the reality on the ground, which is what we're doing isn't working for most people. And unless you would show at least that you're interested in that and seek to correct it, you're going to get a revolution, okay? Because that's not sustainable in a democracy. This is how Venezuela went from being a pretty decent country, actually, with a first world capital I visited as a child, big middle class, huge energy sector, to a place with no toilet paper and no democracy. Because your voters will rebel against you if you ignore them long enough. And this is the critical mistake Republicans have made. This is the tragedy of the last year and a half. I called Trump, the administration, incompetent because it is. But the real problem is that the Republicans on the Hill don't understand why Trump got elected. They think it's an anomaly. And the second it's over, we're going to go right back to 1986 and start fighting communism again, roll out a new supply-side plan. They have not updated their views at all. They're not interested in what's going on in the country at all. And they have either intentionally or unintentionally, but it doesn't matter, subverted Trump's agenda. And because Trump is not a detail guy, he hasn't fought them enough. He gets it, he understands it, but he doesn't understand how the process works, and they've outmaneuvered him. So they pass their signature piece of legislation as a tax bill that's great for me. Does it answer the questions raised by the 2016 election? No, it doesn't. They just passed a funding bill over $1 trillion. Does it answer any of the questions raised by the election? Does it deliver on any of the promises that Trump made? No, it doesn't. And so the truth is, we can measure all administrations by a single criterion. How many of the promises that they made on the campaign trail did they deliver in office? It's really simple. Was he a great president? Yeah, he did what he said he was going to do. When FDR got elected in 1932, 1/3 of American men were unemployed. What's the first thing he did? He created the Civilian Conservation Corps. Unmarried men between the ages of 18 and 30 were basically conscripted into this thing, millions of them, and they rebuilt the national parks, and they seeded trees everywhere. They did all this amazing infrastructure work. And yes, it was a make-work program. It was the single most popular thing Roosevelt ever did in 3 1/4 terms. Why? Because it answered the promise that he made while he was running, which is, I'm putting America back to work. If you run on a platform that says, I'm going to build a wall, guess what you've got to do? Build a wall. I don't care if it doesn't work. I don't care if it's made out of Play-Doh. You got to build a big, beautiful wall, and you've got to get Mexico to pay for it. I don't care how you do that. You've got to do it. Because you said you would. And if you don't, people are going to freak out. Thank you.